In this part of the discussion of AACSB Explores on management education in emerging markets, we will look at what is ahead for schools in Africa and other emerging markets. Aligning with the work of the AACSB Visioning Initiative, what the future will look like for business schools globally is an important area for all business school leaders to consider. And I'll say, what are some of the major trends or hot topics that schools in Africa are focusing on in terms of the future of management education?
A number of things. In terms of the trends, one of the things that schools are beginning to consider quite seriously and perhaps start to explore is what role will technology play. We've spoken about the huge number of youth and those ones that's coming to college age over the next 10 years or so, the need to develop them. Schools are thinking, what is a scalable model that is low cost, that we can use to educate people without necessarily bringing them to the school? Because there are constraints in terms of capacity. So therefore, they're looking at technology as one way by which this can happen. Obviously, there are also constraints to the adoption of technology, which have to do with not only the cost, but also the knowledge and getting over faculty that are a bit more traditional and a bit more averse to change as well there. But nevertheless, that's something that a lot of schools are starting to consider, what's going on with technology, knowing that it's going to impact things, not knowing exactly how, but then wanting to explore how that can go on. That's a major thing. The second is just looking at what do we offer to our students. I think that more schools across Africa are starting to ask themselves that question, more so than before. You know, when I mentioned the relatively young age of the management education sector, what happened in several instances was that you set up a business school, you go to a school that you aspire, you take their curriculum and you offer it hook, line, and sinker. Perhaps, it's what we did when we started. We got a curriculum from ESA Business School and we said, okay, this is it, and then we will use it. But then increasingly, schools have to ask themselves the question, is this relevant? So we come back again to the relevancy of curriculum. I think that that's a question that increasingly, through various fora, conferences that have been held across the continent, is a question we're all asking ourselves, what's going on here? In terms of the topics, a number of things are starting to show up. Sustainability, I think it's something that schools across Africa just have to contend with. For too long, we were focused only as a continent. Or, the issues that have to sustainability, we will come to them after we finish developing ourselves. But then we know that we cannot wait for that to happen. And therefore, business schools are beginning to ask themselves the question, what role can we play in this conversation? And so there are more issues of sustainability. I see across several schools, there is more trying to embed sustainability topics into the curriculum. Not necessarily required. In my school, it's required, not necessarily required, but even they were starting to talk about those things as well. We're beginning to look at more sector-specific programs. So whereas in the past we offered general management programs, so across several schools in Africa now, perhaps you have some schools are offering, for instance, an executive program in healthcare management. We, together with other schools, are offering one in agribusiness. Some are doing some in hospitality, just looking to say what are the needs and then what should we focus on, or outside of the general management.
Right.
So there's more of a, if you like, specialization in executive programs. Those are some of the things that starting to see right now. Increasingly as well, there is more of an effort to think about or bring in business ethics into things. It's not always been required in several schools across Africa, but then many schools are also seeing that this is an essential part as well there and are looking to. So those are the things that I see, the hot topics, sustainability, sector-specific programs, values.
Great. How do you see the role of the business school in an emerging market 10 years from now versus today?
We have to take on a greater role than just the teaching of management skills to people. How do we see the role of a business school in an emerging market? Is it the same role as a business school in an emergent market? With a business school in an emerging market, we would believe that there are other structures and other institutions in place to take on a number of things. In a number of emerging markets, people look to business schools to play the leading role. How well are we living up to those expectations? Okay. Without necessarily being involved in partisan politics, what roles are we playing to ensure governance? So in the curriculum, for instance, is there anything at all that deals with governance? Do you have programs that deal with public officers, those sort of things? What are you doing? Therefore, the role of a business school goes beyond the development of managers. I would like to see the role of a business school in an emerging market as more contributing to, as I mentioned previously, the social and economic development there, okay, and then knowing what to take on. How do you get people to realize that entrepreneurship is important? Yeah. Whereas most people who come to business school dream of getting jobs in financial services or telecom, any of the more appealing industries there. How do you get them to say, what? How do you see management as a way to serve society rather than to further your own personal interest? Right. What areas are you going to go into? I think that we're waking up to this realization. I see changes that are taking place across the continent. I've seen more changes in the last 4 years than I saw in 17 years before that. I see that more schools are actually being active in saying, what can we do to influence things through research, sometimes advocacy, but at least the research that leads to policy formulation there. So I really see us playing a more important role over the next 10 years than we have previously.
Great. So, that's business schools really being leaders in the community. Your business school has also been serving as a leader among business schools in Africa and as a role model. How can, in general, business schools in emerging markets serve as that leader among peer institutions around the world?
There are several ways in which we can make ourselves relevant there to various groups and various stakeholders there. One of the critical things that have helped Lagos Business School over this period is a strong connection with industry. So they know that partnering with us or working with us leads for the future. It's going to be all good for them in terms of different things. First of all, they can recruit from us. We can help them to further their own research interests and things like that. The communities, we've always laid a very strong emphasis on social responsibility. Each class at Lagos Business School has to take on a social responsibility project. So we're relevant to the community. And for the past 3 years, the state government in the state that Lagos that we are located in has given awards to individual classes that have contributed to the upliftment of education in the community. That's because we've had schools that we've had classes that have adopted schools. We've had classes that have taken on the teaching of teachers in schools, have completely refurnished schools, because we cannot leave education to the government alone, giving things. We remain relevant to the communities that we live in, so that's another group of stakeholders that's, In terms of the government, we have 2 centers. We have 4 research centers, but we have 2 that are focused on things that lead to policy formulation. So we have a Center for Infrastructure, Policy and Research Advocacy, just presenting each year industry reports on different sectors, as well as preferring solutions there. We have a Center for Competitiveness and Strategy that partnered with the Lagos State government to work on a project to make Lagos State a model mega city over the next 10 years, focusing on different things. So you can take on a leadership role by being relevant to various stakeholders in the communities in which you operate and being true to what exactly is your mission. And I think that this is something, each school with its own strategy, but then, you have to be at the avant-garde of things in the country.
Yeah, and I think there's clearly a trend. You mentioned the nature of the megacity. In emerging markets, we're seeing increasing urbanization, people moving to the cities, so that's going to become even more and more important.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This concludes our AACSB Explores segment on management education in emerging markets. I'd like to thank Anase for being a part of this discussion and sharing her experiences, insights, and knowledge of management education in Africa and the emerging market context. I invite you to stay tuned for upcoming editions of AACSB Explores. Thank you.